So, welcome to Module 8. You have almost made it to the end of the program. As we move into these last couple of modules, you are really at the advanced end of the program. The last module we went through, all around sales, strategic sales levers. Now moving into data and revenue management. These are the ones that if you're an established hotelier and you've got all those bases in place, these are the modules you've probably been looking forward to, and I hope they provide some significant value for you. But we're in that final stage, the what we call the GM's playbook, and this is the second last module, all around data and reporting. And we have a saying in amongst ourselves and our colleagues here at Hotel Rescue that the numbers don't lie. And when we're actually working day to day in the industry, that we always used to talk about the numbers don't lie. And you have to know your numbers, which is obviously the title of this module. So the goal here is to move you from having no idea to ultimately having your finger on the pulse and knowing what's happening. We lived and breathed this stuff in the hotel. Now, if you're in a significant enough scale of a property or a facility, I would hope that you guys are already across this, but we're winding the clock back a little bit here, but we were quite old school, and we would actually arrive at work and everyone had a pigeonhole. That's how long ago it was, showing my age now. Everyone had a pigeonhole, and the first thing you did when you arrived at work was you would grab your copy of the reports out of the pigeonhole. So we had quite a substantial number of reports that we would look at on a daily basis and really see how we went in the night before, and how are we progressing for this month, and in consideration of the targets that we set, and are we likely to get the goal. And so there was always that, looking forward to and the anticipation around getting the data. That's how, I guess, sad we were that we're actually excited about the numbers, because we knew that they supported the work that we did on a day-to-day basis. We had to be close to the numbers. So hopefully I can give you some tips through here around data and reporting and getting close to your numbers that'll underpin and help you develop the same appetite for getting close to your business to ultimately improve its profits and performance. So let's dive right in. First thing to cover off on when it comes to data and reporting is data integrity. And you may or may not have heard that term before, but what it really means is that the data that you're going to capture and rely upon and lean into needs to have integrity. Integrity in the sense that it is, first of all, relevant, so it's the right numbers that you're looking at. It is accurate, and it's not only accurate, but it's actually up to date, not old data. So let's unpack that a little bit. So the first thing we need to decide to do is what to analyse. What are the actual metrics we're going to look at, and what actually count? There's a common term out there, more so in the marketing environment these days, that they call vanity metrics. Vanity metrics is really a reflection upon numbers that make you feel good about yourself. Or you see, in an advertising sense, you'll see thousands of impressions and you go, oh wow. But what does it actually mean? What does it translate to in terms of, in an advertising sense, does it translate to sales? And what's the cost per lead and then the conversion rate to sales? So you've actually got to get to some real numbers here. So I encourage you not to get caught up in, I guess let's call them vanity metrics, but focus on what's relevant, what's really important for us to count and measure. Little sidebar here that I want to bring to your attention is there are targets and there are also KPIs. Targets is a goal that you are chasing, which is fine. A KPI is, as I term it, an early indicator of success. So KPI is a metric that you look at and develop, and it starts to frame up, it starts to give you a hint as to whether you're on track to your target. So I'll try and give you some examples around that as we go through. So the first thing is to decide what it is that you want to analyse, and then secondly, we need to find a way to capture it accurately and be able to update that regularly so that we can have reliable data, which is at the heart of data integrity. Because all this data integrity is leading to the next module, which is your revenue management strategy, or the yielding and profiteering of your property. So This is a major cornerstone that we have to get right. We have to have the data integrity there. So at the point of booking, depending on the PMS that you're using, you will most likely be capturing enough data to pull it apart and interpret it into quite a number of helpful and useful metrics. So as an example, just the basics that go into your system should be enough to give you an occupancy percentage. And sorry, as I go through these terms, if you're really not sure, please reference to the glossary, which is one of the frameworks in module number 1. And I'd like to give you more of a deeper explanation of some of these, but I think most of you will understand what these terms are if you've come this far in the program. So the basic information, it'll give you a measure of occupancy. Occupancy is clearly the number one thing that most of us are chasing, and it's just a percentage of the number of rooms sold over a given period of time. We give it a day or a week or a month. So you'll be able to measure your occupancy. You'll be able to measure your total rooms revenue. And it's important, I feel, to define rooms revenue between rooms revenue and total revenue. So total revenue would include other things like food and beverage that may be included in your room, or things that you add on and upsell. But we like to measure all this performance stuff based upon your rooms revenue. Revenue attributed to the sale of the room. From your occupancy and your rooms revenue, it's very easy to calculate your average daily rate, or what's termed to your ADR, sometimes your ARR, average room rate. Average room rate is, of all the people that stayed last night, what's the average rate that everyone paid? An extension of average room rate, and this really comes back to a revenue measure, is RevPAR. RevPAR is revenue per average room. So this is not, so the average daily rate is revenue per room, average revenue per room sold. RevPAR is always divided against the total available rooms. So whether you filled them or not, it's dividing the revenue across the available rooms, revenue per available rooms. And it's a really good way to, from an investor's and a business mindset, what is the return we're getting for the asset? It's one thing to get a good average rate per room, but you might be missing out on occupancy because your rates are too high. So RevPAR gives you that measurement on what's the return on investment for the asset that we have sitting here. Are we optimizing? Are we getting maximum utilization of the asset? So monitoring RevPAR really is just a measure of revenue, but it's just it's a leveler that you can use month on month, year on year, to actually see what the RevPAR is as you move forward. Two other things that are really important that you can measure out of basic information from the PMS is length of stay. So what's the average length, how many nights there people are staying for? Lots of hotels sit at like 1, 1.2, 1.3. Some other properties will sit certainly at 2 to 3 room nights, average length of stay, which is a nice place to be. Obviously, the longer your length of stay, the better, I guess, the more profitable you are, because you're not actually turning over the room as much, so your cost of goods isn't so high. And then other properties like serviced apartments will have a much higher average length of stay, but you can get all this information out of the basic PMS data. And the final one, which is really important, and I've actually seen this and been flabbergasted by even technology companies that didn't know what lead time was. So lead time is something that you need to get close to, and it's very easy to calculate. So lead time is something that you need to make sure you've got a feel for. You want to know what your average lead time is in general, and you want to know what your average lead time is for a given period. So if we're coming into a new month, you go, well, hang on, what's our average lead time for this month? We're coming into the month of, let's call it March. What's our average lead time last year? When did we receive most of our bookings? And you'll get a number. So the average lead time in some properties will be 3 days. Other properties will be 20 or 30 days. So the average lead time is important, and we'll talk a little bit more about lead times a little later. But that's the core metrics that most properties are monitoring. The other things that we'd encourage and are not often tracked well, and there's two things we want to talk about here. One is trying to track your market segments. So in the last module, we talked about corporate strategy, conference strategy, leisure strategy, group and agent strategy. Well, ultimately, they're market segments, and it'd be valuable to know where your business is coming from, and it gives you hints on where to do your next a lot of advertising, and then also to measure whether your advertising is working or not. But unless you're actually tracking that and measuring what market segment people fit into, it makes it really difficult to know. You can't, I guess, adjudicate on whether your efforts are working. So market segments is a really valuable one to begin to monitor. So it's back to that question of, well, what are we going to measure? If we're talking about data integrity, deciding what it is that we want to measure. Now, the final thing here that I think you can chuck into the mix to start to measure is all around, I guess, we call it either the channel or the source. And maybe we could use the word segments in there as well, but basically we want to know, well, where's the business coming from? Not, is it corporate or leisure? What channels is it coming via? What is the source? Is it coming via an OTA? Is it coming via a traditional travel agent? Is it coming via our website? Is it walk-in, phone or email? So is it electronic or direct? What channels are performing? And it comes back to the same principle. And you would have heard that this is a cliche, but if you can't measure it or you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So we really encourage you to add those two things in. Most systems will give you the basics. Two extra little parts that we think are really important to monitor are market and channel or source. So trying to have a deeper dive into that. And I would like to hear from the community as well. If anyone's out there and they've got other things that they're measuring and tracking and they find it helpful and what's the practical application of it, please shout out in the group, share it with everyone, and we'll get some commentary around that and see what everyone thinks. So jump in there, but that's the starting point of data and reporting and getting close to your numbers, knowing your numbers, getting your finger on the pulse. It all starts with data integrity. It has to have a purpose, it has to be accurate, and it has to be up to date. We'll see you in the next section.